my newest project. I'm a bit concerned that maybe the volume of the microphone is not right. Okay, I just want to introduce this work. It's not yet completely finished, but almost, and I decided to read it, partly already, as an audiobook. So we're looking here at a book called, this is written by me, Christopher Reusch, and probably will then be shortly available. This is written from the perspective of a woman, which is a new way of expressing myself. And it is called Memoirs of Maxime Bernot, Bloody Rivers of Youth. I have never read it since writing it. That's all I can say. And now we come to the contents, but I will spare you this. I'm excited because I don't know what's expecting me. Chapter 1. Start. At the end of it all, I would have written my memoirs. I would stand on top of some large and dark building, and I would scream my lungs out before I jump. I would enjoy the fall. I would push myself off with the delight of a person that has lived a life worth living, and found solace in the idea that ending it would allow her to write the story of her life, and end it the way she chose. Let me talk about death to you. I have seen death 1,000,000 times. I have seen death looming over people like a cloud, or maybe a wet and cold blanket, casting a cold and damp shadow over their lives. The cloud is the result of fear, and I have seen it in their eyes. I have seen it in my parents when I was a child, and their fear of my death suffocated me, while it was ultimately the fear of death in general, and not my death in particular. I was just the subject of their projection, that daughter that they could loiter with their fear and that they could oppose upon the feeling that being afraid of death was normal. What a joke. A serious joke that nobody gets that hasn't tried to die in one way or another and lived. I tried to die, believe me. I tried dying every time I ingested a psychotropic agent in larger and larger dosages, and every time I did so I felt more alive afterwards. It was a rush, a feeling of yesness, something I needed, some kind of insanely dreamlike phenomenon that had no idea it existed in me until I stumbled across it. I have no idea what that means, and that basically describes everything that has ever happened in my life. I have no idea what purpose means, or life in general. I see meaning in living as such, but in some way I am distant to life, for I have seen death. I am no longer a part of their world, and with their I mean people that live their life as though there was no tomorrow. I cannot understand this mad destruction of everything that lives in this barbaric frenzy with chainsaws and butcher's knives. I cannot understand how we pride ourselves to be the top species on the planet, while the word species is something we first came up with, ultimately meaning that we created the hierarchy on which we placed ourselves as the rotting cherry that never knew it was poisoning the air with its decaying stench, pretending to be fresh and juicy by means of makeup and the false and imitative scent of an aroma. When did it start, you ask? I answer you in the best way I can, with the whiny, self-righteous speech. I was young, real young, probably at the age that most people would consider themselves to be young. I had my first period, and the blood running out of me was freaking me out. Not just me, everyone apparently. There was all this fuss and all these things one suddenly needed to buy. They all looked at me different from that day on, and if I would have lived in different times, they would have married me off to somebody else to make sure that a baby would crawl out of me in no time at all. My life was different. We would discuss my options, which were at this time somewhat modernized ways of getting people addicted to pills. The pill, contraception, as if nothing else mattered than having sex and not getting pregnant, while having sex is supposed to be the safest way to get pregnant, and not having sex the safest way to remain unpregnant. I had no intentions to get pregnant, but somehow I was being told that having periods could be inconvenient and hard to manage. All the people my age, the ones with breasts and vaginas that is, were taking it, or so they said. The gynecologist had money bills in his mind while telling me about this. He had no interest, and neither would he care that taking the pill actually fucked me up. Seriously fucked me up. There was no evidence about the pill ever managing my cycle or improving my hormones at all. All it did was seriously fuck me up. How I know? I'll get to that later. You know how it should be? How I would picture it to be if I could? I would picture it in a way that is different from the way that it has been, but ultimately I can write something about what happened in the hope that at least some people out there wake up to the truth about birth control pills. They are a scheme, a way to confuse you into thinking you are something else than you are. One way to try and control women and femininity. Men may have been behind creating this, but women are gullible enough to swallow their lies. Women want to blame men for their own stupidity, which may be how some women are, but surely not all. I take responsibility for my own life, my actions and my emotions, because I no longer wanted to be a toy for men. I no longer wanted to be a toy for women. I no longer wanted to see myself as a toy. Ultimately, it is choice that leads me to the moments of my life where I realize that there is a lesson to be learned, to escape the wheel of mistakes that this entire planet seems to be strapped to. I intend to learn, rather than burn at the stake by those judgmental eyes of people that pointed me out as a whore because people expected me to fuck, and fuck I did. I swallowed it all up. This entire bullshit of being an animal, and instead of waiting for a real man, I was cheated into wrestling with lesser men, with weaklings that never had the stamina to satisfy me. Certainly one reason that drove me to psychedelics. Men started to become boring. Men that are like pets instead of hunters, warriors. Masturbating little shits that used me to rid themselves of their frustration just as I used them to rid myself of my frustration. Stupidity and ignorance is what drove us into each other's arms. They told us tales about being animals and monkeys, and that fucking was a way to follow our animal instincts. It is a way. One way to express yourself in a mindless exchange of energies. A mindful exchange would look different. A mindful exchange would mean the acknowledgement of the soul in the other person and the taking of responsibility of a vision of life and family that should encompass a sexual union between woman and man. Not childlike messing around with the gift of sexuality by the means of the eternal meddler. Science. So the moment that blood poured out of my body like the ocean of madness that breeds life, my sexual journey started. I was looking for something, surely. There was a thirst, a mixture of innocence, lust, and greed, and all kinds of things. A cocktail of emotions as those teenage years are generally described. I was that exactly. And blaming birth control pills or parents or anyone else for my deeds is pure blasphemy to the very concept of choice and free will, however manipulative the system is that I was born into. It was a deception, and my ignorance was the chance to live without judging. My ignorance was what kept me from questioning my deeds and allowed me to experience without knowing why I needed to experience. What I was after was a clue, millions of clues, information. I needed to feel in order to know what I truly wanted. I was chasing somebody. Ever since I opened my eyes, only I never knew what I was chasing. That I was chasing someone, for I forgot. My deeds were true as I was chasing all along. I was true to my greed for this one person, but how should I know that? How could I have known if I was ignorant of anything but my greed for this food, this fulfillment? It is how life is, I guess. You come here as a soul with the quest for something, a challenge. You arrive here and in most cases your mind knows nothing. It is blank. You have to learn how to walk, how to hold in your feces and urine, and you have to learn to be patient. Patience is a bitch. And as you can imagine, I was looking for someone, a man. Only despite the feeling of longing, I had nothing. I saw nothing despite my longing, and so I longed. And the first man that crossed my path and closely, remotely resembled that which I was longing for was good enough for me. I started clutching, and I held on. I held on with all my might, but there was something pushing me away. It was pulsating like a heart, pushing and pulling, pull, push, pull, push. How are you to know? How are you to know whether the man of your dreams is right in front of you, if you already thought so a dozen times? Is there a clue? A hint? Anything? Trial and error. You have to feel it. You have to know it to see it. A man that is your man will fill you up, and only you will know for certain that he is it. He will most likely not know it, for men are generally more ignorant if it comes to this, although I hear that it varies from couple to couple. What if you meet him? What if you see him and you suddenly know? Will you be ready? Will you be with somebody else? Will you be certain and resolute? Will you do everything it takes to have him by your side and keep him interested? Will you have the courage to show this man that you love him, even if he might not want it at first? Maybe he is hurt. Maybe he has been screwed too many times. You have no idea how he feels on the inside. He may hate women because they only wanted to fuck him. He may have been abused by women. Do you know? Do you care? Will you listen to him? To his pain? His secret wishes? Do you have what it takes to love a man, truly love him for the rest of your lives together in this world, this reality? Chapter 2. The Chase. I was running. Like I said, there was something to follow, a scent, a path needed to be trodden, and trod I did. The chase was on. Do you know how it is to be full of love? Do you realize that there is a certain truth to love that may have evaded you by watching too many sentimental romance-inspiring movies? I will say this to you, and it is your job to take care of its meaning. Love is hate, and hate is love, for the both of them are forever bound together through the basic principle of duality. So if somebody would have told me at a young age that trying to love anything at all will eventually cause you to be jealous, angry, miserable, and all kinds of things, you will run around like a crazy person, and emotions will surge through you like an electric shock from an electric ray. It is true, my dear. It is absolutely true that it is so, for I have said so. Do you remember all those times that you tried to love somebody, like really love that person, and at some stage that person made you furious? You tried to be good and love him or her or it, but somehow that wasn't all there is to it, for sometimes you really hated them. Whether it was a family member, a friend, a dog, yourself, or anybody else. This is a thing of balance. If you try to only love, you will run into problems at some point. If you only try to hate, you may also run into problems, or will most certainly following duality once more. So what is love, my dear? What are we all so busy chasing? When you are in a place of love, you may dread a place of hate, while it may also be the other way around. The secret is to neither love or hate. You can love in a romanticized way, and just the same you can do so with hate. Romanticizing hate sounds like an impossible thing, but it is truly possible. People that come home from shopping and complain about another person for hours, that is hate. They try to love themselves by hating another. A relationship that ended, for better or worse, and the ensuing struggle between love and hate, wrong and right, true and false, blame and acknowledgement of one's own contribution to the circumstances. One's own incapability to only love is that which drives you mad. The failure to understand that if you romanticize love, you will eventually be drawn into hate. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Let that which you pin your love onto die, wither away, leave you, cheat you, betray you, or treat you with prolonged silence and absence, and you most likely will know what I am talking about. What then is a right person? And what is a wrong person? What therefore is somebody that deserves our love, and what is somebody that deserves our full ignorance? Let me tell you something before I indulge myself with the hunt for whatever it is I was hunting. Movies like Disney or any romanticized movie about relationships between man and women, nowadays there seems to be a bit of a confusion surrounding this topic of gender, while gender is not a question of how I feel, but more a question of accepting the circumstances that I have been placed in this time around. Have created an image of what it means to be together with another person and create another living being, a human. They seem to tell us that once you meet, it is going to be pure bliss and only longing for each other and all that crap. This kind of nonsense creates an image in our minds that is romanticized. It means that only the positive aspects are taken for the creation of said image and the negative are being swept under the carpet. This is of course Disney's marketing strategy. They give a person that has no or little love in their life something that feels too good to be true, and they make it look like it is something anybody would want. They make those movies in a way that draws out feelings in the audience, people like you and me, and suddenly you have an entire culture developing around such nonsense. People will expect their partners to be perfect and nothing else. People will expect their partners to bring home flowers and be all kinds of things, even if that has nothing to do with the real world. Even if it is impossible for the person that is tried to be loved, only loved, to fulfill all those traits. You may manage for some time, but eventually something is going to crack. Either you will become your lover's pet and live in a state of obedience because now your lover has you by the balls. You want their love, hers or his, and you are willing to do all those weird things that they want from you. They will give or take love how they please, and because you are afraid of missing out on their love, you will bitch up to them. While at other times you will be the person in charge of love. Sometimes you have something to give and the other person wants it, and then you make them run for it. Suddenly you are in charge and you stand on top, and eventually all things on top must fall to even the scales. What is holding you up when you are looking down on somebody else? You sit at home and have cooked a meal for your husband. Your husband comes home, takes one look at the contents of the pot, but eats nothing of it. Instead, he should have humbled himself to eat the food, because you were the one cooking it. A good woman would have to accept that. Now, the consequence of this might be that the woman will eventually stop cooking for the man, because he never appreciated her food, and suddenly the man will realize it and start complaining. He will say that he gets no food and that he is starving. Well, if he would have been appreciative of the time you spent cooking, he would have eaten your food without complaint, and he would have had never to worry about not having food. This is the chase. A man comes home and feels rejected, not because you reject him, but because he feels rejected. As a consequence, he rejects your food because he feels rejected. He has to reject somebody else. This is projection, of course. Basic principle of the modern society. A true woman would realize that her man feels rejected and wants no food, and she would make him feel welcome and wanted. Only to what degree is she supposed to do that? A starving man might feel happy about a meal, but if the meal becomes a certainty, he will begin to despise the food or overeat. A woman that tried to suck up to her husband by overfeeding him with her gifts will eventually run out of things to feed herself. Eventually her husband, false, assholishness will turn into equally false holiness, and he will pretend to be caring again until he cares about nothing but himself again. Duality, unbalanced, the chase. What I realized after years of trying to figure myself out was the following. What I was trying to find all this time was me. Sometimes other people gave me the feeling I was me, and sometimes I gave myself the feeling I was me. Some people bring me further away. Some people... Bear with me. Some people bring me further away from myself because they try to make me into a version of themselves, and it is part of the challenge to distinguish between them. The same goes for things like diet or sport-like activities. In the end, it is your choice, and if you let others choose for you, then you also chose that. It is always your choice, even if you leave it to others to phrase it. So ultimately, it all boiled down to the chase, and I was a huntress, believe it or not. I would successfully hunt down any man that I believed to be the man of my dreams, although I had no idea what that meant, of course. In that sense, I also had no idea I was hunting, as all I did was getting myself entangled in relationship after relationship after relationship after relationship after relationship. I wasn't really an easy girl, even though some people thought of me as a whore. I was pretty, certain enough, but I also had and still have a temper. With that I mean to say that people would find out if I disagreed with the way things were going. What does that mean? It means that I was hunting, without knowing it, for a man that could put me into place. It sounds really awful to say it like that, but it is the truth. In all my years of youth, I had never experienced a man that could shut me down and show me who I was supposed to be as a woman. That, of course, meant that every man I ever was with was also weaker than me. That, of course, meant that I was somehow responsible for choosing these men because I was either looking for men that I could take care of, or I wanted men to be weaker than me so I could torture them until we would eventually break up. That being said, there is an alternative possibility that I prefer over the other ones for the following reason. I generally chose men that were muscular and large in size. It means I wanted a man to take care of me, to protect me, as I was instinctively looking for a man that would take care of me and my children. I had men that were huge but spiritually more or less ignorant. Every time I would get together with one of these lesser men, for want of a better word, the situation would unfold as follows. Getting together, loving each other, having discussions, pushing each other away, blaming each other, making up, being together, pushing each other away. You get the picture. I was generally to be found in these on and off relationships, too afraid to let go and too incompatible to stay together. Of course, there was also my wish for sexual fulfillment. although none of these earlier men could ever have gotten me close to that. Strange, isn't it? How a soul learns to love? So strange how many times one has to fail, or I had to fail, before I found someone that shook me right to the core. So strange how many sleepless nights I would lay awake, wondering about him, and still stranger how long it took for us to finally be together, even though we wanted nothing more than to merge into one another. Up until that point, in the future, my life was basically hell. Running around without a graspable direction, no goal but blindly tapping around in the dark, holding on to anything that made me feel even remotely loved.